Morning, everybody. Today we're looking at Chapter 6 in our book. The focus in this video will not be to step through the exercises as in many of the videos that you've seen in the course shell. The focus is really to talk about the concepts in this chapter. So really what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be skimming through the chapter and kind of looking at what the technologies are and the coding conventions are and why we do things and how you'll apply it. This is, in terms of the chapters you've worked on so far, this is probably one of the more challenging ones to get it to work right. People on deep frozen machines in particular will run into a couple of issues because of where Microsoft likes to store stuff natively. So just all you guys are probably more aware of that than I am, but you're going to run into the situation when we get to a base page that you'll probably want to make a backup copy of it and put it on your local storage drive, and then have one that you pull into the projects folder in your documents folder for Visual Studio. If I ever have any students that are traditional web or SharePoint students, they're probably wondering what the heck I'm talking about. This is really for the benefit of the people that were in the SharePoint cohorts out in Burlington, who work on school machines that are deep frozen, and every time they reboot, it all resets. So, all right, so if I mention stuff like that, just understand why I'm mentioning it. All right, the topics for the chapter, and really actually looking at, the title for the chapter really kind of tells you quite a bit. In your other coding experiences where you've worked with languages like PHP, and I always need to be cautious when I talk in these classes because I'm thinking in our traditional program, ASP.NET is a second semester class. So those people are either taking PHP simultaneously with this class, as they should, or may not have even taken it before. But one thing that happens when you are authoring, you discover that you go to a website or you create a website and you want it to look consistent. You make a section on the web page that has a logo up at the top, usually a menu, maybe some graphics, a few buttons, and probably example is a good thing here. And I'll just pick on one I usually pick on because I can count on it being almost looking the same every time I look at it. Now, can we be very afraid right now? And the people here in my SharePoint group, what strikes you about looking at this page aside from Donald Trump? Yeah, but what about the advertisements? Right. Here in Burlington, we moved buildings and we didn't have a coffee maker here, and we've been talking about coffee a lot. I didn't search for coffee on my machine, folks. Are we afraid? Big Brother is watching. Yeah, so here we go. Amazon deals off to the right. And I am looking for a new dress, by the way. So. Yeah, that's great. It's crazy, actually, how that stuff works. So, are they listening? Right? They must be listening to our conversations. All right, well, let's take a look at this website as an example of structure, okay? And this is not an atypical website for like a news type site. And really what I'm looking at mostly is the stuff way up at the top, where they have their little BBC logo, and then they have a couple layers of menus and a little search box. And regardless of what page I would go to on this site, that menu is going to be essentially consistent, right? So the thinking here in this chapter that we're working on is that you build websites very often in this fashion, right? So if you create a website that is static, do you want to be going through the process of recreating that top menu section every time and coding it into every page? Probably not. Okay, well, maybe if you have 5 pages, okay, no big deal. 20 pages, okay, no big deal. 1,000 pages, a problem. It would be what? Yeah, and it can be. But here what we're looking at is the fact that we have repeating components, and when you have repeating components, it's nice to be able to have a way to just use those repeating components by just referring to them, and then changing the part of the page that actually changes. So basically the content area of the page. Now, if you get a more complicated site, you'll also find that you might have a few different standard layouts that you use. So for example, if I go back to that BBC site, and I'm hoping that it works this way, but they have sections on their website. So we were looking at the home page before, now I'm in the tech section, and you can see the way that they have kind of little blurbs about their articles, and they have it broken down into little categories. If I actually want to see one of the articles, though, I have to click on it, and then it comes up, and it's got the same menu up on top, but it's got a different layout in terms of the content. It still has all the advertising and featured stuff, but there is a space for the content of the article. And this is the mindset that we're getting into here. So our objective here is to learn how to create basically what we call master pages that would have the repeating components. And then we develop these little placeholder areas on those master pages that we can pump our content into. And now that I'm thinking about this coffee maker thing, I did search for the manual for that one coffee maker, so I strike my comments. Okay, so Big Brother isn't listening. They're just watching what I type. You want me to explain? You want me to explain the dress thing? Okay, good. All right. So the topics here are the bullets right here at the top of the chapter. So we're going to look at how to use mastering content pages. We're going to look at centralized base pages, themes and skins, and then looking at life cycles for pages as well. Is it more elegant? Elegant in terms of maybe the tool you're using? Conceptually, no different. That's an excellent question. The answer to that is yes. You can use it for plain old simple looking websites, absolutely. Because even if you had like a simple like 5-page site, and the students that I have that are traditional web and SharePoint programs, one of their assignments, you guys don't get this because you have a different track that you follow, is to build their own website. And this is the chapter in which I introduce that assignment. And so one of the things that you start doing then is you start thinking, as you have on many of your website projects, what's the site going to be about? I better do a wireframe or a mock-up to figure out, generally what I want to build. And then we strive for page consistency. I mean, that's usually one of the things I put into, personal web page, projects, is that your navigation is consistent. Because believe it or not, as simple as that sounds, like where you can just copy and paste code from page to page, there's still issues for getting it to be consistent. And this is one of the tools that you use to help overcome that. So is ASP.NET better suited to doing very technical websites compared to static HTML? Oh, absolutely, right? Because it has the capabilities of that Microsoft infrastructure that sits underneath, especially when you get to the more advanced materials and you start to be able to tie in databases. You do the MVC, you can pull in data dynamically. But in terms of, if you're looking which is better, PHP or ASP, the open source world is going to say PHP, and the reason for that is very simply because it's free. ASP.NET is pay to play for the most part, because really if you want the tool that gets the job done is Visual Studio, right? But wait a second, Visual Studio is now free. I strike my words. It is different. If you get web hosting, the economy hosting typically is on Linux platforms, and that's PHP driven predominantly. Yeah, you're not going to be able to push your files up to Kronos and have them work. And that's a separate thing we're going to talk about. Um, and then when you go to get commercial hosting, it's the same issue. And the thing is, if you start to shop for commercial hosting, Windows-based hosting, it does cost more than Linux-based hosting. Now, Microsoft is working really hard to change a lot of this. And I was just looking at my Office 365 stuff online today, and oh my God, they added more products that I'm going to have you guys take a look at. My SharePoint people, one of the things you'll notice in Office 365 is that SharePoint is available inside your Office 365 to all Gateway students. And one of the things you guys should do as you're going through that class is to play with that tool, because that runs the cloud-based 2016 version, which is a little different than the version that we're running on the SharePoint servers for now, which is the 2013 version. But they have so many different cool things, and because they're pushing a lot of their infrastructure to the cloud, and when we say the cloud for Microsoft, we mean the Azure platform, there's a lot of capability there to deploy apps, websites of all sorts through that infrastructure, and it works really well. Now, once again, it's pay to play. You can trial it for a while for free, and for students, you know, because you're here at Gateway, there's some components that you can leverage, but for the most part, Azure is a very expensive service. It's usually the domain of large companies, not usually small companies, you know. Now, the interesting thing about all these Microsoft products is that they do offer that infrastructure, the Office 365 and the SharePoint and a lot of those basic apps that you'll see in your Office 365 accounts to nonprofits for free, which I thought was an interesting move. They did this maybe like 9 months ago, somewhere in that range. And I thought it was just a really brilliant move on their part, because Google does the same thing. Google gives away their Google app infrastructure to any business, not just nonprofits, for up to 50 users for free. So all the same kind of apps that we use in the Google environment, you know, the email, sites, calendars, yada, 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 all that stuff, YouTube, the whole shebang, on an organizational level where your email address would be joe@companyx.com, and you can map your own domain to it, just like Gateway does. Free up to 50 users, nonprofit or for-profit. And for a lot of small businesses, that's more than adequate. Now, when you get past that 50 threshold, Google starts to charge you, and that's not free either. But up to 50 is free. Microsoft does not give away their services free to business in any way, shape, or form, but the nonprofits can utilize the infrastructure, and I'm not sure if there's a limit, but my understanding is it's just free. And that's huge because there's a lot of big nonprofits, right? And lots of people work there, and then you get people hooked on the technology. And from my playing with the Microsoft technologies, I mean, we're used to all the Google stuff, and the Google stuff is pretty cutting edge. But some of the Microsoft stuff is executed with a little bit more finesse. You know, frankly, it's a little more professional feeling and smooth. So a lot of opinions there, so take them for what they're worth. Your opinion might be completely different, and that's absolutely fine. All right, so one of the tools that we have to create consistent layouts is a thing called master pages. We've been working on projects, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up, I think what I have here in process. Let's make sure all the folders open up. And you'll notice that the projects that we've been working on will have this folder, and it was created for us when we built the project, right? It just didn't, we didn't hand code this, or did we? Yeah, that was automatic. And then if you take a look at this folder here, you'll notice that there's a front-end master, and you'll see it come up on the screen. And notice what this contains. It contains the basic structure of a web page. This is the page that generates the header section to the top part of your HTML document. The stuff that sits within ASP.NET tags, that stuff those are server directives. So that code will execute on the server and run. That in particular does not generate any HTML unless the code file that sits behind it tells it to. So because this is a master page, whatever code would sit in this page would happen on every site that pulls from this master page. Make sense? So what, yeah, you can have more than one master page. So like with the BBC website, they have like the pages that are for each category where they have a couple featured articles, a couple smaller ones, a few blurbs, a couple sideline things, and that's their, you know, category area. And then when you get into an article, they have a different layout. The top part's the same, but the content area is a little different, and you know the sidebars are different. And it's really not a far step away from the stuff that the book's having you do. So that's why we do that. So let's go back to the book and start looking through here. They start to break down the pieces. I think you guys already understand that you're using different types of languages here. We're focusing, of course, on C#. But notice that in the directive at the top of the page, they do have the keyword master, right? And the reason they do that is because if you look at your other pages, let's say you look at your default page and you look at the top of it, well, I guess this one doesn't have it yet, but if this page was built upon that front-end master, it would say master page and point to the page that it is. And then the stuff that sits inside of it would not have any of this like stuff at the top here or at the bottom. It would just have the code that needs to go into the page. And for this particular thing, it would probably just be this, or maybe all the stuff inside the div. I'm not really quite sure, but the whole point is that stuff would push into the master page in this section. And then the stuff that you see here, all the rest of it, the master page handles it, right? So your content pages get stripped down to just the content. And that, you know, that really in a nutshell kind of is the whole thing. We have this little snippet of code that sits there that is the placeholder. And you can see that it says content placeholder. It's got an ID, and it's inside these ASP tags. Now, these tags don't render as HTML. All their job is to pull in that content. Simple as that. If you do have a completed page that pulls from a master, the little thing up at the top will look more like this. So you notice that the keyword at the beginning of the declaration now is page, because this is a page, not the master. Of course, title is blank here, but you want to typically put something there. And then it points to where the master page is located. Yes, Greg.
When you say that we can have multiple master pages, would that be similar to homepage and then the titles of navigation tabs being master tabs?
Could be.
That main content, basically, and then it branches off into.
No, I think you're thinking it a little bit differently. What we're looking at is like you go to some websites and they'll have a certain look for certain types of pages. And then if you, all right, let's use, how about this for an example? How about Facebook, right? When you log into Facebook and you're logged in and you get like that feed, your homepage feed, and it has certain things on the left, certain things on the right, and a certain way the content looks. And then you click on your own profile and that's got a little bit different layout, right? But everybody's profile page has that layout. Yeah, it really is. It's more like, yeah, that's a better way to look at it. It's more like a template, and the templates can look unique based upon whatever the scenario is.
It's like equivalent to equal to each wireframe for each wireframe layout would be master.
Yeah, that would be one way to look at it. So the comment that was made was that each one of the different looks could be a different wireframe or template. Absolutely. You know, some websites only need one. Some need many. Just how it goes. So this is the kind of thing you're going to see at the top of those pages now, is the pointing to the master file, and then the fact that we would push the content from the page to this placeholder on the master page. On our page in particular, you're going to see a little bit different approach, and maybe this graphic will help a little bit, especially for those that are kind of new to this concept, right? So here's an example of the header and the menu. Header's at the top. It probably has menu buttons and stuff in it too, and a logo, and then some stuff off to the side. And then every time we shift from page to page, really all we're changing is the content in the middle.
So it's like JavaScript, where you don't further changes versus refreshing
Nope,
the page.
nope, different. Okay, the question here was, it's like JavaScript. We're thinking Ajax here, is what you're thinking. And with Ajax, what happens is you do have, the page loads once, and there's a script that has the capability of pulling in external content and populating an area of the page. That's what we call a flicker-free page. It does not refresh to change the content. That is not what we're talking about here. The page still redraws. It's just that we're redrawing a new page, but the top and the side are still the same. The content is changing. It's not creating a flicker-free page. Okay. All right, so they walk you through a little exercise here. And what they're going to end up doing, and kind of like what I was pointing to, is they're going to take all that stuff that's in between the form tags and basically strip it out of the content page. And actually, maybe you should think the reverse. Strip out everything but that from the content page, along with the ASP declarations that go with it. All right, so you guys are going to work on that. Then what happens here with your master page, I'm just going to kind of show you this conceptually. If you can envision the fact that maybe this master page started as a page like this one, where it had the whole structure, it had all the content in there. One way you can create a master page is after you've created a regular page is, I like the way it looks, so I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to strip out all this stuff. That's exactly what they're doing in the book. And then they're saving it as a master page. And then it ends up in this folder, and then we call upon it. Now, from the flip side, when we are creating, when we have the master page created and we're just creating the content page will look a little different. I'm going to pause the video here for a second and I'll pull up an example. All right, so to open up this example, I'm actually going to close the one I have open right now, and I'm going to open up a website, which is the completed version of Chapter 6 that I've done in a previous semester. And then what this will show you is a combination of many different things in this chapter. So let's open up the master page folder and just take a look at what the master page looks like. I mean, for the most part, it looks like what we've been looking at. But notice that we get to this main content section, like we had in the other file, but inside of it is a content placeholder. Now for PHP people, this would be the equivalent of putting an include here, right? You could say include whatever page. But you're noticing that there's a little bit of a difference with that because this is programmatic. If I did an include, I'd have to say specifically what page is coming in, right? What this does is it takes any page. See the difference? Now you can set up PHP to do this process as well, so don't think that that technology is limited in any way, but I'm just showing you that this is the master page, and then when we take a look at the default page, take a look now at what happens to this one. Notice all the doc type at the top is all gone, all the stuff at the bottom is gone, any of the repeating components are gone. But what we do have here is all the stuff that will go in the content section of the page. And that's all the stuff that sits in between the ASP content tags. Now, you're noticing probably that there's two content areas. Okay. Yeah, so I see your thoughts in your head before you even ask the question, getting to predict you. All right, but if I go back to that master page, so we know where that content stuff is going. It's going right here. But notice at the top of the page, there's also a content placeholder for stuff that goes in the head section of the document. Because it's not unusual if you have a document, and you think about this, that you might have different script files you're pulling in, or different CSS, or, you know, what have you, right? Pages are unique, and we can put stuff in the body section, we can put stuff in the title section. We can have multiple content sections. It doesn't have to be just one little box on the page. It could be 20 boxes on the page, for that matter.
Does each content section then have a wireframe area on the page? That's like laid out?
Yeah, well, you know, you would, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just long story short. I mean, in this example, we're putting this content, whatever it happens to be, inside of a section tag with an ID of main content. So I can style the main content area to take up a certain dimension, to have certain styles, but then also the stuff being pumped in will also have all its unique attributes as well, because if you look at this, we still have H1s and we still have things with classes and IDs and all that, and the style sheet will still affect those. But if I had like special stuff to throw into the head section of the document, and in fact, I could just put in some nonsense if you guys want to. Yeah, see, I'm doing really bad, real bad CSS here. All right, like what the hell is this guy doing? Yeah, I'm just trying to like make it as simple as possible, right? But this little directive here basically tells all the text to be read, right, on this page. Okay, so if I were to save this and then go ahead and launch it, see how some of the stuff is being overridden by other CSS, but most of the text on the page turned out red. And if I were to do a right-click view source, what I do want you to pay attention to is the stuff that was on a separate page, the default ASPX page, got pumped into the infrastructure for the front end, and then when it rendered, the server tied it all together. So you got the doc type, you have the style that I added to the head section, you also have all the stuff that was on the default page inserted into the section tag, wherever that is. Well, there's a closing for it right here. So all that stuff here got pulled in from default ASPX, and this got pulled in from default ASPX. Yes, Greg?
The hierarchy of the ASP tags, you have master, then you have page, and then you have content placeholder.
Yeah, I would caution you into thinking that there's a hierarchy there. It's not really a hierarchy per se. They're just pages. And really what you... Well, you're defining it. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's kind of like, you know, you're sitting in a row of chairs, right? And you've built the row of chairs. Some of them, when you built it, had stuff sitting in the chairs, like you're sitting in a chair. But we have a couple spots open that we can pull in as we need. Is really, you know, they're all just files. You don't have to use a master page, but the reality is most websites have certain repeating components that benefit, you know, from the fact that you don't have to recode them, because it'll always look the same too. That's the other benefit of it. So. Oh, right. Yeah, and you know, the other side of that is, I mean, really in terms of the amount of file size that you're creating something that is smaller in size. It doesn't mean that the output is smaller in size, but on the server it occupies less space. And things are done programmatically, and that's the other thing that you guys really have to start thinking about here, is we have stepped away from a static world now. Static web page creation is really more the exception, not the rule. It's not that you can't do beautiful websites with static. It's just that when you really create real stuff, that goes out there, the kind of websites you're used to visiting are all dynamic websites. And that's the web that we are used to and the public is used to. So they want websites that do stuff, and they want sites that look consistent, all of those things. All right, let's jump back over to the book, if I can find it. All right, they walk you through the steps here. You guys are going to work that out on your own, so I'm not too worried about that. All right, and what he does in this next section is he explains all those things. So you see I'm kind of skipping past that. All right, next topic is what we call a base page. Base page is a little bit different. It is not the master page. However, it is something that you can create as a structure and then pull it into any of your projects. So let me explain. If you were working on a website, right, and you put a lot of work into it, and you came up with this beautiful way to, like, let's say, do drop-down menus. It's just one example. Or you created a footer for a page. And let's use that BBC website again as an example. So way at the bottom of their site, they always have this on every page, right? And really what it's designed to do is allow you to access any of their site's plural features from any one of the pages that you're on, okay? So you spend a lot of time coding just the footer to make it look just the way you want. And then knowing that the BBC is like this big organization, and they have like they have a news site, they have a TV site, they have, world sites, they have radios, they have all this stuff going on. But they want this footer on all those sites. And you're going to have different coders working on all those different sites. However, somebody in corporate's like, yeah, but you got to put this footer on every page. So what they do is we create what they call a base page, which has that information stored in it. And the correlation here is kind of like the HTML fragment. You write a snippet of code that would be useful reused, and the base page is kind of that. So, for example, if you built a structure that had that footer, and you wanted to use that structure on a new site, you can create your new project, pull in your base page, and have that structure available for you to then customize. You wouldn't have to start from scratch again. It makes sense. It really does, right? So that's what we call a base page in a nutshell. So, no. Carl, are you saying you want me to talk about nesting master pages? Yeah. All right, if you want me to backtrack and do that. The one thing that Carl here is trying to point out is it is possible to also nest these pages. One example of that would be, and let's use that site again as an example, right? Let's say no matter what, they always have this header and they always have that footer, right? So we could consider that our master page, right? But then we switch over to the content pages, and on the content pages, we'll have an aside with advertising, right? But that aside might be a little bit different depending on which page you're on. But it still has a structure. So for example, if I was looking at the sports page, the aside on the sports page might have a section for scores, from other games, right? Where if I was on the financial page, it might have a thing for, stock feeds, stock price feeds or something. So you would actually set up 2 additional master pages that would be pulled into the other master. Yeah, so let me give you this first scenario. Let's use those 2 examples. We had the sports page and the finance page, So I have the master page that has the regular header and footer, and then I hit sports. Sports pulls up the sports content. Then it also pulls up, in addition, the master page has a spot for pulling in a different master page. And all that master page has is the sidebar. Then depending on if it's sports or finance, it'll pull different components into the content placeholders of the sidebar master page. So you see how that works? So, I mean, there's layers. And how far deep can you go with those layers? As far as your mind can manage. Okay? I don't, you know, I mean, I see people using these techniques all the time, but typically they're always done very incrementally and in pieces. You see where the redundancies are, and then you clean them up. But, you know, usually 2, 3, 4 layers deep is about as far as they'll see people go with that. And hopefully that answers that question with nesting the master pages. All right. And they don't really say much about that. This you'll learn about more as you're doing it. One of the tricks to working with the centralized base page, though, folks, is where the file gets stored. Because when you create that file, and I should probably point this out now, and this is probably more critical for my people here in class. By default, Visual Studio will create a folder inside your Documents folder. And you'll see I got both the 2012 and 2015 here. And I'm trying to remember which folder it is now. That's pretty bad, right? I think it's templates, project templates. All right, now I always have to have a student remind me where it's at. So it goes into the My Exported Templates folder. And you can see I have one here from a previous spot. So what you do is when you're doing a new project, you start the project, you import the base page, it pulls it up from a zip. My SharePoint students here in Burlington right now, because your machines are deep frozen, that file, when you guys reboot, will disappear. That's why you need to make a backup of it. When you go to look for it to import it, this is where it looks by default. And the reason it looks there by default is because then it pulls up into their interface. So they'll have like a little spot here, and I'm sure it's, all right. I'm not saying, what I'm looking for is a graphic of it, but you know, like those interfaces that you get when you add a page, for example. I'm sure the people watching the video love this. What page is he on? Basically what will happen is what you'll be able to pull that base page up through this interface. It'll pop up on the list just by virtue of fact of being in that folder. Yeah. And then you'll notice, like, for example, if I want to add something to this project, I don't know if my base page is in here. I suppose, oh, there it is. So that's the one that's sitting in my folder. And it just shows up in here automatically just because it's in that folder.
So it's going to be saved in that folder.
Yes.
Okay.
So you can just, once our computer's rebooted, we can just grab the file, complete, save back up somewhere else, go back into that C drive folder.
And it'll show up there.
Can we drag it from wherever we have it stored into our Visual Studio project?
No. No, it has to pull up from here. So once again, to reiterate, when you guys create this base page, especially people on deep frozen machines, you need to take that file and copy it somewhere. People that, you know, most people listening to this won't have that issue, but my SharePoint cohort 3 and Burlington people do.
Do you know where it goes on C?
Yes. It goes in this folder. So in your Documents folder, Visual Studio, My Exported Templates. All right. That one you're going to get more of a feel for just by simply playing with it. Yeah, and then here they're talking about some other stuff. In fact, I'm going to switch my discussion now from that template to this. That template is not really a huge thing, but if you were working on projects where you do use repeating components, and where that's more apt to happen is if you're working for one large corporation or enterprise that has maybe multiple websites or a collection of websites, and you have certain parts of them that you want to be consistent. It makes sense that if you put a lot of work into creating a structure, that you save it somehow that's even independent from the project, and then when you do a different project and you want to use that format, there it is all set to go. I'm sure you'll probably tweak it, you do stuff with it, but it's another part of that process. All right. This next topic in here, the ASP.NET Page Lifecycle, this basically talks about what happens to a page as it goes through the process of being requested by the client to rendering. And then even after it's rendered, what happens, right? So the typical scenario is you, the user, sitting on a computer connected to the internet, is running a browser. That's our client. That client clicks on a link or types in an address or does a search and finds a resource and goes to the server where that resource is located, requests the page, and then hopefully gets a response. Now, for a static page, that just involves going to the server, finding the file, reading the file, sending it back. The client receives it. It's an HTML file. It goes, okay, I know what to do with this. I render the page and make it happen. Now, there's a little bit more that happens when you're doing a dynamic website, though, because all of a sudden you're throwing in programming code the server needs to execute. You might interface to the database or text files or who knows what other sort of resource, a data feed of some sort. Of course, there's always images and sounds and whatever that you're pulling in, and then that all gets stitched together, pushed back to the browser as HTML. Maybe it didn't start as HTML, but it ends up as HTML so that the user can see it. All right, so the beginning part here is page request. That's what we just talked about. And then we go into a mode known as start, and then page initialization. So there's little things that go into each one of those components as well. And why this is important for us doing dynamic work is each one of those things is broken apart into separate components that we can programmatically respond, react, and adapt to. So, for example, if you are, let's say, requesting a page that needs to pull in information from a database, well, when is that information getting pulled in? Well, you're not just making a request for the page at that point, right? The page has already been requested, and somebody might fill out a form and then hit a button. Then that stuff has to be received. And before we stitch the page together, well, first we better run a query to get that information to put into the page. So you see, like, requesting the information from the database is a separate little component too. And that would have to happen before we actually send the information back to the browser. So you see little pieces. And that's just an example of that. Now, some of the other parts of these, so for example, like you initialize, the initialization is complete, whatever that happens to mean for whatever program you're running. The program might need a bunch of resources, so it might need to spool up before it does its work. And then, like, before the page loads up, you might need to perform a certain action, so, all these little components. And finally, your page will actually get loaded. You'll have things that you talk about where you might do validation. So, for example, you might send a page to a user that has a form, and the form itself might have some HTML5 validation, or you may have written JavaScript validation, or written ASP.NET programmatic validation. You can do validation in all those different ways. And you might have to process that first before you would go on to the next step. Now, postback. All right, so what's a postback, folks? You hear that term a little bit? Sure. Yeah. Because when I hit that form, right, and I hit the submit button, and the method is post, right, I'm posting information to the server, then the server does a bunch of stuff and it posts information back. So what's it posting back? Well, it could be a thing that says, you forgot to fill out the last name, right? Or here's the stuff you asked for, or we didn't find it, here's your error message. And there's communication that happens back and forth. Rendering, of course, is the process of actually getting it to appear on the screen. Let's say HTML part. And then finally, when the page is done, we unload. And that's a thing that we don't think about either, because maybe a good correlation there would be like how you work with a database, right? The polite thing when you're working with the database through code is that you establish a connection, you do your queries, you get your information back, and then you close the connection. And the reason you do that is because then you free up the records, especially if you're doing a query where information is changing in the database, you need to release it so that somebody else can access that same record. It's just considered polite. It's like you log into a computer, you should log out. Some people do, some people don't. It can be. Yeah, it absolutely can be a resource issue, no doubt. All right, so the next section here, they walk you through actually creating the base page. They walk you through the process. You guys will do that on your own. Then reusable page templates. That's where you use it. And then finally we get to the section on themes here. And this is kind of a fun one because a lot of people aren't aware of actually how this kind of thing is done, right? Have you been to websites, and I think government websites are the ones that are probably most notable for this, where they actually have little buttons where you can increase your text size. Now, most of us know that we can just go to our browser, right, and just, come up here and do a zoom or, control plus, control minus, scroll forward, whatever. And the browser has some of these tools built in where you can make stuff bigger, smaller, and easier to see. But if you went to a government website, they very often have these little things where they'll have, little glyphs of letters, like a little letter A, a medium-sized one, and a large one, and you can change your font size. Or maybe they have a thing for high contrast or dark or light, and this is something that you can do programmatically, and you can do it a number of different ways. But this environment has some nice tools for doing that type of thing. And as you can see here, it actually creates a separate folder for themes. And depending on how many themes you have, and you can have as many as you want, frankly, this one here has a dark gray theme and a monochrome theme. Then each one of those themes might have different images that go with certain visual components, and they each have their own CSS, right? Because if you're changing the look of a site, you're going to pull in different CSS to make that happen. How does ASP.NET or your server, your browser, know which theme you're pulling in? Well, that's how you coded it. And you might have the ability to give the user control over that, and that's really what this exercise does, is it sets up two different looks and allows the user to go to a little drop-down box and choose, do you want the dark gray one or do you want monochrome? So you can be on the same page, hit a little thing, and the whole thing changes, which is cool. It's kind of fun that you can even do that. So that's done using that approach. So there will be a separate folder created, separate CSS, and separate assets for each theme. Absolutely, yeah, right. Now, that's probably its most typical usage. Yeah. And then, frankly, well, there's other websites too where you can go in and, like some people they use their Gmail accounts and they'll go through the trouble of customizing the look of what Gmail, usually changing the background, get the picture of the beach on there so when you're in the office you think you're on vacation. But that's up to you. But hard of seeing people typically are the ones that most typically use these features. The other thing is if you're a person that uses your computer in the dark at night very often, real bright themes can hurt your eyes, right? Like, right, gamers? Right? That's why they go to gaming websites and everything's dark, right? Yeah, because you guys are, sitting up till 2 o'clock in the morning with your Doritos and your Call of Duties and. All right, so themes are fun in that way, that you have that capability, and the exercise that they have here in the chapter will walk you through doing that. Now, the fact that you have different themes for your site, and this, remember, what I have here is a completed version of chapter 6. So you'll end up with something that looks like this, just like what they showed in the book. And notice that there's also skin files that go with, and when you do the exercise, you'll follow through and you'll see that, and I think you'll appreciate it, how cool that is. Finally, you also get to the point where you have skins, and skins are, kind of in the same category with a theme, but we're not necessarily skinning everything. I mean, generally speaking, a skin gives you a different look, right? It's kind of like putting on a Halloween costume. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of applications offer custom skins, and usually it's not really changing what's there, it's adding to it or adjusting what's there. And what they're going to have you do in the chapter is they're going to have you skin the button to look different. Okay? Just to give you a feel of that. So that's kind of a fun thing too. These are more like visual things, the themes and the skins, but the master page and the base page really are kind of like templating tools, the best way to say it. And those are, crucial components. Now you guys are starting out with traditional ASP.NET, and then SharePoint people, as we go and start to do MVC stuff, you're going to see that how critical it is to understand this part before you do MVC. Because MVC will take all those pieces that we're breaking apart, content, stuff that goes in the header, your master page, your base page, and all that stuff you're stitching together, and breaks it down even further. Where little itsy bitsy pieces can be, stitched together and reused all programmatically. And the kind of the long and short of it, honestly, is that you're setting up a scenario in which, you can change the water pump in the car without having to tear apart the whole motor. That's really kind of the scenario. Everything is broken down into components, and you can change one component and fix many things across many pages. All right. You do have a little section here for creating, consistent looking pages, and frankly, you take this all with a grain of salt. For my mind, when you create a page, simplicity takes you really far. Clean and simple looks better than a bad attempt at trying to make something fancy. And I think it's really cool that, I've seen kind of like this whole cycle that's come through the web. And things are back to clean and simple. It's kind of like a good guiding principle where a lot of the big websites, you look at like the way Google runs things, you look at the way Microsoft does things, how Apple does things, look at their websites real carefully and how they choose to do things. It's not by mistake. Clean and simple is really kind of their motto. So
if you're going to make it more complex, you can probably start out nesting that being clean and simple, and you can have a layer of more complexity, so you just drop a lot.
Right. Well, it does depend, on the type of site that you're building, because, if you're building, a site that requires a lot of really fancy graphical interactive features, it's going to be different than a business site that's providing information. Business sites that's providing information, just give me the information, please. I don't need the bouncing ball on the screen. All right. I don't think I have too much more to add to this chapter. I think you have all the information now that you need to arm yourself to go ahead and do the work and understand what you're doing. There are some challenging things in this chapter, but they're fun. You know, the results are really cool. All right, that ends this lecture, and you guys are off to work on your code.